Serious Americans, would you be in support of putting a law in place that government officials, such as senators and the president, go without pay during shutdowns like this while other federal employees do? Why, or why not? Response 2.
I would prefer that Congress can't leave the Capitol until a budget is passed.
It's not a bad idea, but we also have to include the president, since he has to sign it to make it law.
True, but the Congress could override a veto if they really wanted to.
Removed. 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 Removed.
Response 3.
I think that could turn into a game of big bank little bank. The wealthiest politicians could just wait out those with less money in order to get their way.
Apparently this is actually the exact reason that they still get paid during a shutdown, so the rich politicians can't hold the non-rich ones hostage over certain issues. Or so I have heard. Maybe that's wrong. Edit. It's been pointed out that almost everyone in Congress is rich enough that a couple months without pay would have practically no impact at all. The rule I mentioned seems outdated nowadays.
When I clicked this thread I was like, hell yay, this should obviously be a law, but just hadn't thought of this. Would be an awful idea for this alone.
I think the correct solution is, Congress isn't allowed to leave DC until the shutdown is resolved. Sit down and work until you figure out how to do your job.
You don't get to leave the chambers. There's food brought in, access to restrooms and showers, but no leaving the premise until a resolution is made. Edit. So after reading some comments, AMD thinking, I'd like to add that the executive branch does not immediately get locked in as well unless they vetoed a budget before the shutdown. But once Congress passes a budget, if the president vetoes, they are immediately placed in the chambers and locked in. Edit 2. Removed the now showers and raising the temp idea. Don't want things too rushed.
As long as the food is mediocre and the restroom cleaners don't have to come into work unpaid.
Why not simply let them clean their own restrooms?
Response 4.
This is a terrible idea. For one thing, most of them would not care. My senators are worth millions of dollars, they don't even notice their salary. For another thing, some congresspeople do really depend on the salary. This is their only source of income. See the problem here? If we cut off their pay, then the rich congressmen have a weapon to use against the poorer congressmen. There would be more government shutdowns and threats of shutdowns, and vote with me or lose your paycheck would become a viable, common tactic for the wealthier members of Congress. A better idea would be to just stop voting for idiots. Or, more applicable to this audience, fucking vote. Edit. Thank you for the gold and silver, and the great discussions. This shutdown is extremely frustrating for everyone, and there are no easy answers. But the more we talk about potential solutions, the more likely we are to find some that work.
I came into this thread thinking, oh great, another agree-a-thon where op pretends to try and start debate over something on which 99.99% of Reddit already sides with him, but your comment totally blindsided me. I never considered this angle for a moment. Well said.
I was honestly afraid that that would be the case when posting it, but I was hoping that there would be good discussions and counterpoints. Much like this reply. It provided some really good counterpoints that I wasn't thinking about as being a thing until now.
Hey, I feel quite sheepish now as I have hastily judged both you and your question.
Hey, I get it. It's Reddit. I think we're all pretty much programmed to think that way. No worries.
Not only that, but the program seems to dictate that everyone who dares to think another way gets downvoted into oblivion. Glad to surprised by a good, proper discussion in this thread.
This has got to be one of the nicest exchanges in Reddit.
Response 5.
I'd rather change the law so that not passing the budget defaulted to a continuing resolution. There is no reason a shutdown should happen.
I kind of like how our Canadian and UK friends handle this. If you don't pass a budget in time, an election is triggered.
This government 100%. If Congress can't pass a budget on time, the government is broken and needs to be replaced.
Couldn't this be weaponized? For example, if my party has a minority stake, I would have an incentive prevent a budget from passing to trigger another election in an attempt to increase my party's seats.
But if the sitting government can't pass a budget, then the seats should be open for a smaller party to take if they win there.
You're missing the point. The minority party would use this for political gain, not that they've reached some impasse, border wall or not.
The minority party wouldn't be able to do so because the majority party can pass the budget without them, unless the government is dysfunctional, in which case the election should be triggered. A dysfunctional majority party which can't pass anything is no better than two parties at a stalemate.
Response 6.
No, but I'm also against allowing critical federal employees to go without pay. I think if they're required to work, we should be required to pay them. Regarding the why not of politicians, we're finally starting to get some who aren't coming from wealth. I'd hate for those people to get pushed out because they can't afford to be politicians. I want to see more representation of working and middle-class people in our government. Obligatory update, thanks for the silver, kind internet stranger.
Agreed completely on this. If they're being forced to work, they need to be paid. Can you imagine working any other job where they forced you in and didn't pay you? There would be an uproar.
I'm British and I literally don't understand why slavery is apparently still a thing in the US.
I'm American, and neither do I. All I can do is vote and write to my Congress people, unfortunately. Removed. Removed.
Response 7.
The whole reason they don't already is because then the richer congressmen would use it against the poorer ones. Terrible idea.
Yeah, seriously. If you're putting pressure on your politicians to have to choose between do the right thing and get evicted from your house, it's not really a fair government. The rich and powerful senators who have been in power for decades won't notice the paychecks missing. It will be the first-term representatives who are actually trying to make a difference that will get hurt the most.
Simple: freeze all assets of sitting Congress and the president, then they are all on equal terms.
People will get paid. If you take away their legitimate income, they turn to crime. That's true for everyone from the most down-and-out homeless guy stealing a loaf of bread to the powerful politicians taking bribes to make their mortgage payments. You're never going to be able to combat corruption with your tactics. You'll only encourage it. It's not simple at all. Only the simple-minded would think it is.
Forget corruption, you don't even need to go that far. A younger representative who's paying rent or paying off a mortgage will be fucked much more than an older one who paid theirs off years ago if their pay is stopped. Then there's married couples. A dual income will offset the cash flow issues, and those who can just borrow money, through official channels or just from their rich friend's family.
Response 8.
No, seems pretty pointless. Not many of them are struggling for money. We should institute Canada's policy. If you can't run a government, you all immediately go up for re-election.
Except that would allow a minority party to force a new election in the Senate anytime.
Here in Australia, where we have a similar rule as Canada, that doesn't really happen very often because independent third-party candidates know that an election is not always winnable even for an incumbent. So we end up with strange situations like people promising to support the government against no-confidence motions, but not supporting any of their actual policies. Still though, we don't get government shutdowns every few years.
No, we just fire the leader of the party whenever their approval ratings dip below a certain number or they have an extramarital affair and impregnate one of their staff. Okay, he was only deputy, but come on.
He was fired for hiring her as part of his staff while they were in a relationship.
Literally invented a $160K a year position for her.
Is that dude single? Asking for a friend.
Response 9.
A better solution would be to cancel recess for everybody involved. Edit, just to clarify, recess. Removing recess means that the Senate cannot adjourn.
Or better yet, prevent the Speaker of the Majority Leader from being the sole person who can call a vote. Mitch McConnell has prevented the Senate from voting on a bill that the Senate approved 100-0. No one person should have this power.
A lot of other countries have something known as an opposition day, which means that the opposing party can do what they wish on that day. It helps for situations such as this where it would pass regularly but doesn't get past the majority leader.
If Opposition Day occurred every month, that would be a beautiful thing.
I think it's nice to think about now, but in the coming years when the roles are hopefully reversed, it wouldn't be so fun.
It should be there either way. It's only for a single day for a month and it works well because it ensures that bipartisan bills pass.
How is it done in other countries though? What makes it so the opposition doesn't just undo everything that was done the previous month?
Response 10.
At face value I would think it's a good idea, but I saw someone pointed out a rather logical reason why it wouldn't. Basically the wealthier representatives could wait out the poorer ones.
Worse yet, the representatives whose lobbyists have the bigger pockets can keep them afloat.
The money in politics from lobbying is the issue. If we could somehow just be a democracy rather than treating politics like a business and see lobbying for what it is, someone paying to push their own agenda, we would be a step closer to being able to do this. Not as easy as it sounds though.
Quote, see lobbying for what it is. Bribery.
Response 11.
Functionally, you would need an amendment rather than just a law. Congressional members aren't paid from annual appropriations and are paid through a salary not based on hours worked, but as their status as members. More importantly, members of Congress are constitutional officers. The President, and life-tenured federal judges, is also a constitutional officer and also cannot be prevented from carrying out their duties except as allowed in the Constitution. As such, they're all constitutionally entitled to pay. Article 1, Section 6 of the Constitution. Quote, the senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services, to be ascertained by law, and paid out of the Treasury of the United States, 27th Amendment. Quote, no law, varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives, shall take effect, until an election of representatives shall have intervened. It also functionally wouldn't do much besides perhaps damage the one or two financially untenable younger members, AOC for example. The shutdown and pay being withheld impact only those employees that need that money imminently, which is not the vast majority of Congress and certainly not the President. So that amendment would functionally not be much more than a feel-good effort.
I don't think Article 1 really applies since it says compensation is determined by law, but you make an interesting point about the 27th Amendment. That wasn't the point of the 27th, but by the letter of it, it does seem to apply. I'm not totally sure what judicial recourse would look like if such a law was challenged, though. Can the courts compel the Treasury to spend money that wasn't appropriated by Congress? That seems like a constitutional issue of its own.
Quote, can the courts compel the Treasury to spend money that wasn't appropriated by Congress? Yes, it has been done quite recently in fact. In Beer v. United States, 696 F3D 1174, Fed. Circle 2012, a group of federal judges sued the government for not giving them a cost of living increase, arguing that it violated the Constitution's compensation clause. The court held that the failure to give the suing judges a raise did indeed violate the Constitution and remanded to the claims court to determine the amount of back pay owed to the judges. The Supreme Court denied the government's petition for certiorari, and the Treasury ultimately paid out the ordered back pay.